You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. We're greeted this evening by the presence of 4 Atlantic tropical cyclones, ranging from Tropical Storm Sally over the southernmost part of Florida to Paulette, which is still on the verge of hurricane status, hasn't reached it yet, to pathetic little Rene, which is still going on as a tropical depression, and rumours that it could survive for quite a few more days yet, actually. And newly developed formed Tropical Depression 20, that's 20 for the Atlantic this season so far, on September the 12th. Along with that, another tropical wave over Cape Verde right now that could also develop into a tropical cyclone. There could also be another development way down below 20L in about 5 or 6 days' time, and there could also be 1 or 2 rumours of subtropical development, and that would take us right through to the Greek alphabet if that was to all result in tropical cyclones, tropical storms getting named. So we are really in at the peak season at the deep end right now, but as it is, we've got the 4 systems active, 3 of them named, but only 2 of them at tropical storm intensity or higher. That is Sally and Paulette. Obviously, you may be aware of the threat to land. Sally has triggered storm surge watches and hurricane watches for Louisiana and along the Gulf Coast. And for Paulette, hurricane warnings in effect for Bermuda. The island could receive the worst impacts from the storm as it strengthens through Category 1 or maybe even Category 2 status. My name is Nathan Foy. I'm here again this evening. I'm joined by our very durable team, which consists tonight of Sam, Strat, Ryan, and Wyatt. Good evening to you all.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So we've got peak season in front of our eyes right now. Not a huge surprise that it's happened this way, but still a concern nonetheless. Generally, when we get to peak season, it's not so much that we've got so many storms active, because it can happen quite often, but it's where they are and what threats they're posing, and particularly Sally has got everyone's attention.
Yeah, I mean, both Sally and Paulette are hurricane threats right now. You know, both have either hurricane watches in Sally's regard and are expected to become hurricanes, or in Paulette's eyes, already hurricane warnings and could get very close or even potentially make a landfall over Bermuda, which is quite hard to do, but it's certainly a possibility. Fortunately for now, at least, Tropical Depression 20, which models a couple days ago were much more keen on pushing west towards the Caribbean, looks very likely, at least within the next 5-day period, to recurve sharply early and misdirect land impacts, at least there. I know we've had quite a few storms that have plowed through larger portions of the greater Antilles. Isaias and Laura in particular brought very significant rainfall, so fortunate to see at least this one moving a bit away from there.
We're going to start losing track of all the names of this season pretty soon, but here is the latest radar imagery showing what's going on with Sally right now. And what can we detail from this imagery? Looking a little messy there. A lot of the worst parts of the storm displaced to the south.
Yes, and it appears that based on radar that the center continues to move in the general direction the NHC is forecasting currently to the west, northwest, or northwest. It's not the greatest defined center, but it's not one that you have to really search a lot for. It's looks like it's about south of Marco Island right now.
Now, it became a tropical storm earlier, as it was I imagine it was still overland when it got named?
It might have been.
Yes, it was.
So it was over southern Florida at the time. Do we think it's got better as it's moved on, or is it
It's about
struggling
the
just a
same,
little
I
bit?
think. Struggling, I think, a little.
Yeah, it looks quite similar to yesterday in terms of overall core structure, but a bit better defined overall. The center's much easier to see, at least on satellite, even though most of the convection is just placed south and east. Most of its struggles to date aren't really from, particularly strong wind shear or too much direct, environmental dryer, as much as it's been land interaction and, of course, dryer that can emerge from that.
Bare on the western side right now, though.
It is bare on the western side, but that's more in due not really from wind shear as much of the cyclone just being in its formative stages of life and just actually having a land crossing over Florida. If you want, like, I guess an analogy from earlier this year, just to give a comparison, it's almost like Hurricane Hannah when it was a tropical depression, with a lot of that convection much more displaced to the south and east of the center as it first formed, and it got its act together as it intensified, and then really started to see much more thunderstorm activity wrap around the north and west sides that were much more bare at first. That's a good comparison to what we're seeing right now.
And with now 20 tropical depressions or higher for the Atlantic hurricane season, I've lost track of how far ahead we are of all the other seasons at this point.
We are 21 days ahead of
21
2005.
days ahead of 2000. Could you believe that?
Almost a whole month.
The probability at this stage, that we will reach the Greek alphabet before this month is out, and conceivably within the next 7 days, if all really goes down that track. I wouldn't say that's a high chance, but it's possible, unlikely. But in any case, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, sure, why not? And this is, I can imagine so many people will be watching this season, might be their first season tracking, and they'll expect this every year now, but I can tell you it isn't like most years.
Yeah. I will say a very fortunate thing, despite all the absurd storm activity with formations, is that right now, at least, we still have less ACE for the entire season with the first 18 named storms, almost 19 now with 20L, than the first 6 storms of 2005 had. So, even though there's been many, many storm formations, very few of them have actually gotten intense at all. Most of them have remained quite weak, at least compared to what you'd really see. We've had 5 hurricanes, only 1 major hurricane, which was Laura, of course, and that was a very bad storm. The others were all Category 1 systems. So we haven't seen many stronger storms yet, but we are in peak season right now, and that could change in the near future. We have Paulette forecast to become a high-range Category 2 right now, and a lot of 20L is beyond 5 days right now for its future too, so that could also become quite strong in long term.
So here we are, this is pretty much the nerve center. On the left-hand side, you can see latest satellite imagery, visible and infrared on Sally. On the top there, you can see Paulette on the left-hand side, and Rene there further east, much more difficult to track on the infrared. The radar, of course, live radar at the bottom there. Myself on the top right hand side, which you really don't need to see, and the bottom right hand side at the moment showing the whole picture of the Atlantic. Now, we're also getting some information from some of our other team correspondents about recon that's in Paulette right now. So have we got any news on that?
I think actually K is a picture that's posted. It does relate to the drop zone that just came in. 981 to 982 millibars is the pressure that's coming out from that drop zone right now. So deeper pressure than earlier today for sure. SFMRs aren't supporting hurricane strength yet for the system, but with the pressure that low and its generally improving appearance, with conditions around it expected to improve, it really shouldn't struggle to at least become a minimal hurricane within the next 24 hours or so.
And there is an infrared loop of all of that as well. So again, you can see quite clearly all these tropical developments, 4 cyclones on the screen, and 1 wave on the very far right of your screen. So this is what we have at Atlantic peak season. A reminder that hurricane warning is in effect for Bermuda, and a hurricane watch is in effect. Let me just get the proper wording for the current watch and warning information for Sally. So right now, storm surge watch in effect for the mouth of the Mississippi River to the Alabama-Florida border, Lake Pontchartrain, Lake Maurepas, and Lake Bourne and Mobile Bay. Hurricane watch for Grand Isle to the Alabama-Florida border. That includes the lakes there as well, and New Orleans. Tropical storm watch for the Alabama-Florida border to Ocklawahanee River in Florida. So a lot of the same places that we've seen crop up time and again this season, again under threat from potential hurricane conditions.
Yep.
And Wyatt, you are pretty much the closest person to Sally in this room, at least.
Yes.
And you were on the live stream a couple of nights ago, or last night. So how have things changed in your mindset?
It's just been like a really difficult storm so far to track because of the center reformation, and now the forecast, it looks like it has shifted ever so slightly to the east versus being on the Louisiana-Mississippi border. It's just slightly to the west of Gulfport, Mississippi. And so that would put us slightly closer, to the storm. And we are expecting, or there actually is possible for tropical storm conditions here in Pensacola because there is a tropical storm watch in effect. In fact, they are saying that there is even a potential for winds of 58 to 73 miles per hour along the coastline at Pensacola. In one county over to my west, there is a hurricane watch in effect.
Yes, I was about to ask how close that was. It looks close.
It's really close. It's too close for comfort.
And interesting to note that, these days, I'm a little bit surprised that they haven't issued warnings on this yet. In fact, they haven't issued any warnings through the whole storm's life so far.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting, especially considering that Winfield down in South Florida, which looks to be touching the Florida coast. And if we remember earlier, it was actually a bit larger, covering the Florida Keys. And I was really surprised to see that there was no warnings or anything there.
Now, of course, that field isn't fully representative. It's basically, you could get tropical storm force winds anywhere in that shape.
Yeah.
But obviously, you don't want to take any chances, and especially with Paulette there as well. It's got a much larger wind field too, and that's headed for Bermuda. It's it's much larger than the cone. It's pretty much guaranteed that Bermuda will get tropical storm force winds, hurricane warning out there. These are the two storms that are sparking warnings and preparations at the moment. But what do we reckon then? The Mississippi landfall currently expected by the National Hurricane Center if you follow the center line, but they tell you not to do that with good reason, especially on this storm because it's got quite a large cone for their standards. The 5-day cone puts it from the northern extremes of Mississippi to central Georgia.
Yeah. And one of that uncertainty, is because it's going to slow down significantly as it nears landfall, rounds the edge of periphery of high pressure and gets picked up by a trough at the same time, really. And one of the most notable things is they've really picked up on the increase in potential rainfall totals. Even earlier today, there wasn't even a splotch of 10 inches anywhere near the northeastern Gulf Coast where landfall is expected from either Louisiana to Mississippi, Alabama. But now they're expecting 10-plus inches of rainfall from coastal areas in Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, with 15-plus inches over parts of extreme eastern Louisiana, with 20-plus inches remaining just offshore, potentially over some of the islands. So the rainfall total forecast has almost doubled for a lot of these coastal areas since earlier today even. And that's probably going to be the largest widespread threat from this storm along coastal areas, even though the winds will be very problematic just east of the landfall location, most likely, and generally around where it makes landfall if it's a hurricane with a uniform wind field at that time.
So there it is once again. Let's take a look at the latest infrared here. This is Sally right now, and let's just see if we can get this might be a new frame. Just seeing whether we've got the very latest here. That's just loading in. But you can see the convection's been bubbling up mainly on the southern side, mostly south of the center. You'll see places, say north of Miami, that might have barely got anything looking at that satellite imagery.
They did get a bit of wind.
A bit of
last night, at
wind.
least. I
Yes.
saw some videos of, it was quite windy actually.
Just looking at that satellite loop, though, it does appear that there is some convection trying to begin firing around where the center looks to be. So that could be a sign that it's starting to organize.
I think we can all see what's coming. It is going to intensify over the Gulf.
Right. It looks like that's starting right now.
Yeah, it's getting a curl on it.
Yep.
The question is how much, and the real headache that emergency management and National Hurricane Center have is that the intensity forecasts are usually much more uncertain than the track forecasts.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot not quite clear with the system yet, because even though it's going to have very warm waters for the next 2 days and minimal wind shear, the question comes in, especially closer to landfall, how much land interaction might mitigate potential intensification, along with they're staying at this morning, the forecast discussion. I'm not sure if it's still there right now. There's a bit of uncertainty with potential wind shear impacts in between days 2 to 3 as it gets much closer to actually coming on shore. How that materializes, if it does, will have substantial impact on the end intensity as this thing comes on shore. So unfortunately, you're still looking at a pretty wide range of potential intensities when this thing really comes back towards making a landfall along the northern Gulf Coast in a couple days from now.
Now, is Kay suggesting in private comms there that they're saying that Paulette doesn't have an eye? Which I would find be a little bit of a surprise.
I'm not sure. I mean, it's saying just based on the flight level winds of 90 miles an hour and 70 mile an hour surface winds that, I mean, the data crossover didn't specifically mention eye detection.
Okay.
Microwave was hinting at, parts of an eye wall yesterday.
Look at that. Look at the satellite, though. This is the visible, looks like part of an eye wall to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible it just didn't really fully grasp it on the first pass, but, I mean, Paulette's gone through significant structural change since yesterday as wind shear began to abate over it, and it's tried to evolve its structure to be more suited for intensification
and they're saying
as it gets closer to Bermuda.
A pressure of 981?
982 to 981, yeah. The drop zone, said 982 on its land-in, but the data points come in that could support 981 with that. So it's really, one or the other, but it's a 1 millibar difference out at sea. Regardless, though, it's still deeper than it was earlier today.
It's got to be a hurricane shortly, you would think.
Yeah, I mean, 982 or 981 is 5 or 6 millibars lower than what the pressure they went at 5 p.m. So, yep. I mean, obviously that doesn't necessarily mean that the storm rapidly deepened 6 or 5 millibars in 2 hours. That just likely means the actual pressure estimate was a bit higher than the storm actually was.
Yep,
but
and
pretty deep for a storm at 70 miles an hour.
Interestingly, the GFS run from 18Z initialized this storm at 982.
Looks like they're being quite accurate with the run then.
Just thought I'd throw that one in there. You can also see Bermuda if you look carefully on the top left-hand side there, especially when it gets dark. You can see the small outline of the island, and you can see no effects on land there at the moment, but you'll really feel the storm tomorrow. Well, you'll feel a little bit of the storm tomorrow, but
Monday
most
you'll
of it
really feel it.
will be Sunday night.
Yeah, I mean, the latest count says 2 a.m. Atlantic time on Monday, so really overnight Monday into early Monday. The center is going to be making its passover slower because it's going to be getting to the end of that ridge and really starting to turn and recurve out to the northeast. So its forward motion might actually slow down slightly in between the evening and night hours of Monday through most of Tuesday afternoon before it begins to accelerate again as it rounds the ridge. So that's an unfortunate thing for Bermuda in regards to the length of potential impacts with Paulette. But like you said, early morning into Tuesday and Sunday night's really when the worst of this storm is going to really start hitting them out.
Early morning into Monday, yes. Looking once again at the radar imagery, and you can see here Sally, and looks like there's a lot of marine warnings out there right now. A few more have gone into place. And you can see actually the eastern side too, rain showers and possibly heavy downpours there moving into the Miami area and north of there as well towards, over Fort Lauderdale and beyond. Over Naples as well, looks like there's a little bit going on there, but most of it is just offshore or over the Everglades. And slowly this storm will start moving away. What's its current forward motion right now?
Sally's currently moving due west at 7 miles an hour. So not the quickest moving storm. Actually, out of the 4 active systems in the Atlantic right now, it's actually the slowest.
And this is another one of the problems we
Sorry.
might have.
But they're already calling for evacuations in New Orleans outside of the levee protections area.
Yeah, I mean, considering the
State of
uncertainty.
emergency has been declared for Louisiana.
Considering some of the uncertainty, that's definitely wise. The storm surge expectations for parts of New Orleans and coastal Louisiana is still 6 to 9 feet right now. From basically the mouth of the Mississippi River over to Lake Borgne.
I mean, when you see, New Orleans has been pretty much the center of the cone for a day or two.
Yeah, I mean, the unfortunate thing is, a lot of the actual peak surge is going to be dependent on if the storm decides it wants to intensify very quickly early on, or if it just wants to more gradually step up. Because, you could be in a situation where maybe you have some storm surge higher than 6 to 9 feet if it makes landfall at high tide a bit stronger than expected. But even 6 to 9 feet, a lot of Louisiana is, especially on the coastline here, is pretty low lying, so that can cause significant damage. So the fact that they're calling for evacuations ahead of time right now is probably the right thing.
I would agree.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, and if you do get an evacuation order, please heed them.
Yeah, and another note regarding the levee system. It's definitely possible. I'm not saying this is going to happen, but it's definitely possible that due to that, depending on the positioning and the strength of of Sally, that the levees could take another beating similar to what we saw with either on the scale of or near the scale of what we saw with Katrina. But it's just interesting because Katrina was really the storm that was really more known for its storm surge because of the levees failing, and not so much the wind or.
I mean, I wouldn't really go to that realm at this point, though, because right now the expected surge is less than half of what Katrina had with storm surge right now. So, 6 to 9 feet, while really problematic, of course, for low-lying unprotected areas, definitely not up at that scale right now. This is right now.
A few people have thrown around Isaac as a comparison. 2012 could be. That was a Category 1 landfall.
Yeah, that's probably a much better analog to go with. I know we got fame bias and stuff, but the comparisons aren't really warranted. I get the landfall area is somewhat similar. The path this is taken to get there is quite different. The angle of approach isn't the same. The actual intensity and peak intensity are likely to vary pretty wildly with the current forecast, at least. Of course, there's always unexpected deviations that can occur, and the intensity forecast isn't as certain as normal for a system. But
And Sam is also showing us Miami Beach there as well.
Yes. Just basically showing the current conditions that are ongoing across southern Florida. As Sally's center is located away from Florida in the Gulf, as it's heading for the Gulf, and the condition, it's possible, and looks like the conditions could be deteriorating there for a little bit longer before Sally moves out of the area.
Yep, certainly delivering significant rain. You can see a few gusty winds there affecting that tree or large bush. Also getting dark there as well, as you can see, as we know. But on the radar you can see how that's appearing Some of the oranges just about filtering through to Miami Beach. Of course, it depends where exactly along the beach that camera is as to where the worst conditions are. But obviously, the worst conditions in the whole storm right now are just off the coast, off the southwestern part of the Florida Peninsula.
Yeah, Naples Municipal Airport is actually reporting a sustained wind of 25 miles per hour, gusting to 33. And that was taken 13 minutes ago.
And that is probably about, I'm trying to figure out some distances here, maybe 20 to 30 miles from the center.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously not the most damaging winds, but definitely problematic, you know.
And that's to the north of the center as well. And there's not a lot of storms there right now. It's just a little light rain on radar.
All right. Well, I think that's a new record for the amount of time we've spent not taking any questions so far. So you send them in, start your message with Force 13 all in text, and it will light up big and bright for us in the chat section. We'll field those questions as best we can. Obviously, there are 4 systems active, so any of them we'll talk about. I imagine most of the questions will be to do with the ones threatening land. We're here for the hour, so make sure you do that as soon as you can. Do you think Sally will make over $1 billion in damages as a slow-moving system? Well, who knows, but it could be a slow-moving system that causes a lot of damage. Could we see intensification like Wilma? No, it's in the wrong place. What do we think of the 2 disturbances right now? I
Doing
take
in the
it...
Eastern Pacific or the Atlantic? Because there's 2 in the Eastern Pacific too right now.
Well, there is that. I imagine that they're talking about the Atlantic, the Gulf thing, which is that little swirl there. Doesn't look like that's going to do much. And then the wave near Africa, which probably will be a brief tropical storm. But I tell you what, according to earlier model runs, and I find this fascinating, that wave over Cape Verde, some models are suggesting that will become a tropical storm and die off again. It will have time to do all of that before Rene dissipates.
I mean, it would have to do that within the next 2-3 days, but that's certainly possible. Rene, even though it's very weak now, is expected to probably persist and blow up enough thunderstorm activity to keep its classification for some time. So, I mean, it's much different than the expectation that it'd become a hurricane that were even just 2 days ago, but I mean, it's still going to be a lingering thing to talk about for a little while.
And just looking at the Eastern Pacific briefly, you can see that wave there as well, or a disturbance now really, rather broad, but models are fairly confident that will become a tropical storm, and could get to about, I'd suggest, mid to high range tropical storm strength at the moment.
A question actually about why Rene died. I don't know if anyone else wants to talk about that briefly, but there's a couple of combo factors in that one.
Well, it was still a bit of a surprise though, considering conditions were fairly good. Maybe dry air has quite a bit of an impact there. It's just not really firing. Whether that might just be because it's behind, it's in Paulette's trail, or Paulette is influencing the storm more than what meets the eye.
I think it's a combination of all 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the discussion impact and the forecast discussion from the National Hurricane Center, so far at least they've mentioned more moderate sea surface temperatures, because where it is right now, it's about 26 to 26.5, which is, we've seen with storms last year. I think it was, I forget the exact name of the hurricane last year, 19 degrees Celsius water is going to happen. But, typically it isn't supposed to sustain itself like that. Add in not really the most favorable atmospheric humidity levels, and you could see why it's struggling a little bit. But a lot of this wasn't really expected to be this bad for the storm.
Somewhat small as well. It just reminds me, it does remind me of one of those southern hemisphere storms that are usually pretty small, the Indian Ocean, and they just keep firing and firing for days and days long after the battle has been lost. So, that could go on for a while. If it does survive as a tropical depression, it will eventually end up around Puerto Rico and Hispaniola in about 5 or 6 days' time.
Yeah.
And then who knows what from then on.
No.
Yeah,
no.
it's really supposed to die out by day
models
3
are
now,
suggesting that any energy left from it that does reach that far will probably feed a new tropical cyclone in the western Atlantic, but that's way out.
Right.
Yeah, I think right now they're saying degenerate into a remnant low at around day 3 and get dissipated by day 5 for now. Maybe the leftover energy does something way down the line, but it's probably a bit too far out for now, really, to say really too much about it.
Daylight imagery has ended for Sally, so into night mode now there as well, as we transfer from the visible imagery, which was showing very impressive tops appearing over the center of the storm, to the infrared channel. And Sally looking fairly good there in those late frames. Sometimes there's a bit of a bias. It looks more dramatic because of the low sun angle, but I think it will get a move on and pretty soon.
Somebody a few minutes ago was asking, what are the chances of Sally rapidly intensifying?
Moderate. It could rapidly
Certainly not a
intensify.
possibility.
If it did, I
conditions-
doubt it would get beyond Category 3, but stranger things have happened, and this is the Gulf of Mexico in September. But
Yes.
at the moment, just to
conditions-
clarify, National Hurricane Center and us forecasting a Category 1 peak.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a couple of probable inhibitors that would really stop too much rapid intensification if it tries to really leg up more quickly. Land interaction and a bit of uncertainty with shear, probably the two main inhibitors for it right now. But regardless of the exact wind speed, you're still dealing with a likely hurricane landfall with a storm surge in pretty low-lying areas of 6 to 9 feet, and the added potential rainfall threat of over 10 inches of rain on a wide area of coastline from Florida all the way to Louisiana, too. So I wouldn't, pay too much specific attention to, will this storm rapidly intensify and become a major hurricane, or what's its exact end intensity going to be at, because it's a very threatening storm right now, regardless of the end intensity.
People do often look to the winds because that's really what I guess the public have been set in their ways, guided by authorities over many decades that really prioritize the winds.
Yeah.
But the surge and the rainfall will be a big threat with this one, especially for Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama coastlines for the surge, and inland there for rainfalls. But I don't know how they're doing for rainfall this year, but I imagine they're above average considering all of the activity we've had.
Yeah, it'd be hard to say no to that, really. I mean, it's been quite shocking to see this many storms so early on in the year. Fortunately, not many of them have gotten very intense, but the sheer number of them has just really been, throwing, I think, everyone that's tracking the season for a loop.
Lots of comments then. We'll try and get through some. How big is Sally's Winfield? Fairly small. I don't have actual numbers. Something like 40 miles?
I believe it extends 80 miles to the southeast of the center.
80 miles southeast, and that's the largest quadrant.
Yep. Yes. I think that's the only quadrant right now, too.
Let's see. Do we think that Sally, Paulette, and TD20 could all be majors?
It's extraordinarily unlikely that all three do that. I think it's simple as that.
I
know
wouldn't say it's
people-
extraordinary unlikely. It is rather unlikely.
I mean,
It's
if I'm
always a
just talking,
possibility.
it's technically possible, but if you're talking raw statistics, it'd
I would
be
say
very
the
difficult
chances
to
of it
calculate.
are higher than the 0.3 we gave Dorian for Category 5 last year.
But I would probably say under 10% still.
Yep, under 10.
Overall.
Yeah, sure. Under 5% probably, but
Probably, yeah, because Paulette really has 2 days, maybe 2.5, to get to a peak right now, and it's not the best structure. And someone was asking about Paulette's structure earlier, satellite appearance. It's gone over a bit of an evolution as the upper level steering currents around it have generally changed direction. That's contributed to the sheer lessening, but the structure's adapting to it right now,
It's
which
really
hasn't just allowed.
sprawling as well.
Yeah, it's really trying to establish its outflow much heavier than it was yesterday, when it's very constricted anywhere other than the northern side, due to 30 to 40 knots of wind shear for about 2 days almost.
Moisture
And it's doing
plume
much better.
extending from that storm all the way to Africa, really.
Yeah, but I mean, the really notable difference is it's got much more convective and outflow activity on the southern half, whereas yesterday and 2 days ago there was none, completely restricted by wind shear.
Yes.
So that evolution, the fact that that's actually taken some time,
No,
probably
it's doing better. It really wouldn't surprise me to see a hurricane before this night is out.
yeah, that wouldn't surprise me either. Right now, at least, though, the overall model consensus doesn't call for that one to be a major hurricane, fortunately, although it could get close, and if it really just goes a bit stronger than expectations, could clip it for a bit, too. The current peak is 110 miles an hour on the forecast, so it's certainly possible. 20 could become one much further down the line, of course, if we're talking, could that get to Category 3, but a lot of its lifespan, where it's going to have more favorable conditions to try to reach peak intensities past 5 days, and that's much more speculative for the time being.
Yeah, it's
And of
really a
course-
wait and see on that one.
Yeah, and of course, Sally, I know the HWRF is really trying to say that Sally will ramp up heavily and get towards major hurricane strength, but the overall model consensus is well below that. I'm pretty sure it's the only outlier really going that far right now out of the major dynamical models for the time being. So you can see a couple stronger storms.
Is it possible that Sally could make the turn east earlier in the Gulf? I think the only way it's going to be further east than what is forecast is if it goes slower than expected.
Yeah, I mean, that's possible because,
If it goes
you know,
slower than expected, then the conditions around it, it's more likely to get sucked up earlier in that sense, earlier on its track progression, if it slows down and wastes time, as it were.
yeah, because when it gets picked up towards and starts to move more inland and make landfall, that's really, for forecast discussion for the National Hurricane Center and computer models, there's going to be a ridge really at that point that's just enough north-south orientation to push it northward rather than just have it, kind of die out and completely stall. There is going to be some steering current, so it might slow down and meander for a little bit, but it won't, stall in the same place for 3-4 days, anything like that. So, but if it doesn't move as quick right now, it could try to do that a bit further east than the current model indications and the forecast indications are saying.
Is there any chance that we will get to Wilfred before the end of September? I'll tell you now, there is, and might be a bit controversial, but honestly, we could be at Gamma by the end of September.
Yeah, it's very, very likely.
Well, I wouldn't say super likely, but it's definitely a possibility now. 20L likely becomes a hurricane. That earns it the T name.
Teddy.
And then how many do we have after that?
Two.
Yeah, how many do we have after
One.
that before we go into
Vicky and
Greek? Two. Yeah,
Wilfred.
two. So,
Yes.
you're really close then. And by model indications, hypothetically, if both of these current other just active disturbances develop, you're at the end of the alphabet. You're 21 named storms. It's unlikely that both of the other disturbances develop right now. But, if you look at the computer models, other things down the line are certainly possible. And then you could really get over there. I mean, this is an extraordinary year. As we're really at peak season right now, much further ahead of any other season that's ever been recorded so far.
And yet still sort of lacking in energy, accumulated cyclone energy, still barely getting to average.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I think we said it a couple times, I'm sure anyone here will agree with me, that it's been very fortunate despite the number of named storms. We've only had 5 hurricanes. 4 of them were Category 1s.
We've
2
still
of
had
them
one
were-
big one, though, haven't we?
That's true.
Yeah.
That's, of course, unfortunate, but
It
with the
only
season...
takes one.
Yeah, by this time though, by this time in 2005, we've already had, 6 hurricanes and 3 majors? Or 4 majors?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that we've only had one major hurricane out of not 18 named storms, almost 19 so far, is very, very fortunate, at all things considered.
Let's go and get another closer look at, well, there's Sally. I'm going to try and get Paulette close up on the infrared in just a short moment here. See how that one's looking. And see if we can make any more sense of whether there's an eye developing there or not. Any more news from Recon?
Not too much right now. They're doing a peripheral move across the northern sector of the storm. They are getting hurricane flight level winds, not ground level winds. Quite a bit away to the north and west of the center, but those SFMR readings are around 40 knots there, so they're not indicating hurricane strength yet.
Alright, here we are again. The start of this loop really shows, it looks appalling, Paulette, at the start of that loop, but at the end, I really do think that's an eye developing.
It does appear so. I don't believe there's any dry air that could get into it.
I mean, the southeastern side still has a lot less overall outflow, so it is possible that it tries to entrain some dry air and halt things up a bit. But overall, the outflow is much more impressive on the southern half than it was just even 24 hours ago. So it really goes to show how the storm's trying to perform in an area of less wind shear.
And again, you can see Bermuda there on that chart getting closer. But you know, I think Bermuda will generally be okay if the typical preparations are made. They've received plenty of hurricane impacts in the past. Obviously, there will be significant effects from the storm. But at the moment, it's looking like probably worst case scenario is a Category 2 landfall.
Yeah, that's only if it does actually make landfall. What are the chances of landfall in Bermuda from Paulette right now?
Oh.
I mean, if you draw a line on the current cone, the 5 p.m. cone, it tries to take it as a landfall, but it's very important to note that, you know, there's obviously deviation. The center of the storm can pass anywhere in that cone, and Bermuda is very small, so it is still exceptionally difficult, even if it's forecast a couple days out, for a storm to actually fully complete a landfall. I mean, you know, regardless of that, though, tropical storm winds are near certainty, and hurricane force winds are probably more likely than not right now, because, you know, it should continue to expand in size as it gains more latitude as well.
Let's see if we've got some more comments here. Continue tagging us. Start your message with Force 13 all in text to try and nab our attention at least. And yes, about this subtropical system, there is a little murmur that there could be a subtropical system that develops in the far northeastern Atlantic later in the week. Not even at 10% at the moment. We've not marked it, but something to watch out for. Nonetheless, you know, we've seen so many storms that have popped out of nowhere that the models haven't really picked up on until the last minute, and it just makes you wonder whether there'll be more to come. Certainly, after this wave comes out, you know, the invest there, that could be the V name. The Gulf of Mexico system shouldn't form, but you never know. I mean, if it did, that would just be crazy. Some models suggesting that there could be activity off the US East Coast next week, and more models suggesting that there'll be another low-riding wave next week as well off Africa. So you've got Greek letters there in 7 days.
I mean, I don't even want to imagine that, really. We're seeing another burst of really new storm activity. I feel like since July, the named storms haven't really come individually. They've come in pairs almost. You know, you'll have, you know, a period of 1 to 3 days where 2 storms form, and then you'll have a week or two of, you know, a bit quieter, and then you'll have another 2 come in right after that. You know, even this month still, we had the 2 storms, Rene and Paulette, form. very close to the start of the month. Nothing for about a week or so. Now we have Sally and 20L, which is very likely going to become the next named storm within a day of each other.
Yeah, is it possible that we could have more named storms in the Atlantic than the Western Pacific before the year ends? Well,
Oh,
it's only
absolutely.
happened once before, and take a guess as to when that was.
It actually happened
I
twice
mean-
before, 2005 and 2010.
2010?
There you go.
Oh,
Yep.
yes, that's true. Twice before.
I mean, I think it's almost, I wouldn't want to jump the gun too much, but it's increasingly likely considering the Western Pacific's already passed its peak season as well. And I haven't seen any long-range models right now, but I'm sure they're not really saying too much in terms of new storms other than this tropical depression, although there is indications of a Philippine system into the South
Yeah.
China Sea. Other than
That's
that,
about
though, that's about it for the next 2 weeks almost. So it's been a very quiet year there, and it's going to be hard for them to catch up to the Atlantic, especially if we keep popping out new storms like this. So definitely possible that we outdo the Western Pacific and the Atlantic basin this season.
That's crazy.
A question to clear up really quick as well, because I'm sure people are curious about 20L. Someone asking the odds it heads further west towards the Caribbean instead. That's very unlikely at this point in time. There's very strong agreement among the computer models that's going to recurve out to sea. I think the forecast track, the National Hurricane Center, depicts that very well.
Yeah, if you look 2 days ago, though, they were all going into the Caribbean.
Yeah,
So
I'd say
you
it
can
was much
forgive
more
people for
confirmed
asking
then.
those questions, definitely.
Yeah, but right now, the day 5 point is expected to be beyond 20 degrees north, so it's going to be further north than most of the Caribbean already, and its latitude still going to be over 10 degrees or 600 miles east of even the Leeward and Windward Islands. So it probably won't be the largest concern there, but definitely some heavier swells from it could be a rip current threat, not just for greater portions of the Caribbean, but for even the U.S. East Coast down the line. So just because there isn't really too much direct land impacts forecast from this in the next week doesn't mean that it can't be a potential threat to life in regards to rip currents and things. And that even goes for Paulette, too. Heavier swells are going to start reaching the U.S. East Coast soon. So if you're along the eastern seaboard and thinking it's a good weekend to go out for some surfing or something, please take some extra caution. Just make sure you're being safe.
So updates are out on the storms now. Sally and Paulette remaining the same in winds. National Hurricane Center have acknowledged that Paulette is down to 981 millibars. No changes to any warnings. No changes to any of the warnings for either storm. So to recap the current situation on both of these systems right now.
I just want to say one thing quickly. It does appear that Sally is pretty much on track with the NHC's cone right now.
Okay.
So they've done pretty well, I think.
All right. So Paulette then, Hurricane Hunters are in there right now. That's what they're saying. 8 p.m., 70 miles per hour, pressure of 981 millibars. Hurricane warning for Bermuda. Hurricane conditions expected in the next 24 hours. Tropical storm conditions, actually, which will eventually become hurricane conditions.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think
the storm is located 28.7 north, 59.2 west, moving west-northwest at 15 miles per hour. And for Sally, just to recap the warnings again, they haven't changed since we went on the air. But to recap, storm surge watch for the mouth of the Mississippi River to Alabama-Florida border, Lake Pontchartrain, Lake Maurepas, and Lake Bourne, and Mobile Bay. Hurricane watch for Grand Isle to the Alabama-Florida border, including those lakes again, and metropolitan New Orleans. Tropical storm watch for the Alabama-Florida border to Ocklawakanee River, Florida. Strat?
Yeah, I was just going to say alongside the update there with the intensity pressure-wise, at least being acknowledged from the recon, it's also notable that they're saying, preparation to be difficult by tomorrow evening. So even though the storm isn't going to be making its closest approach until early on Monday, they are acknowledging the broader nature of it now. So the outflow and impacts will start to make things more difficult for the island beginning tomorrow evening. So if you're there for some reason watching this, make sure that generally everything's done earlier tomorrow, so you don't have to worry about being caught up in some generally more hazardous conditions. at least in regards to Paulette.
I'm looking at some forecasts and stuff, and the National Weather Service office in Mobile, Alabama, is saying that rainfall totals of 6 to 12 inches are expected near the coast, and they're saying localized amounts of 18 are possible along the coastline. That is
significantly.
baffling.
Yeah, and that's in regards to Sally, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's in regards to
So I mean, that really goes in line with a lot of the forecasts because the Weather Prediction Center is saying 10 to 15 inches forecast for coastal areas from even your county, where you're in right now, in far northwestern Florida, through Alabama and Mississippi into Louisiana, with 15 to 20 inches trying to edge onshore in parts of Mississippi and Louisiana. So alongside the wind and storm surge threat, this is a significant rainfall threat. You're talking about 6 to 10 inches of rainfall, still extending pretty well inland into Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, and Florida. And, so especially if you're in an area more prone, not just to storm surge, but flash flooding, make sure you're taking some general preparations. I know we posted a link in the stream chat earlier for sandbag locations in the New Orleans region. So make sure you're staying up to date with that stuff. All your local officials are really doing everything they can to make sure that you're helped to be prepared in this storm event.
We've got 10 more minutes for questions live on the air here. Does Sally have a CDPS rating yet?
Currently, from what I have seen, is stage 3 for Mississippi. So that would be extensive damage.
And as far as I believe, nearly a 4, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I mean, it isn't expected to have the largest wind field, of course. It doesn't have a lot of time to really organize and grow in size, as well as not really gaining a very heavy amount of latitude. But those rain totals will probably really push it up, especially when you have 15 inches trying to lick on shore now. I think in terms of the forecasting change, it is notable for people that are in the impact zone right now to pay extra attention to that rainfall and flash flooding potential, just because of the fact that the rainfall total forecast has been about doubled in the past 24 hours or so. So it is much more of a concern than it was yesterday in that regard. So please make sure you're paying extra attention to that, as well as the other conditions that the storm will bring.
A comment there from Orlando. Weather picking up there, but they think the worst is over for northern Florida. You might be, well, apart from the Panhandle region, you might be right with that. Although rain will continue to sweep up north by the looks of things on the radar. Does 2019 have more ACE than right now? In terms, I assume, of in the Atlantic?
Well, especially that we're already down to S, which is what we ended off with in 2019.
In terms of ACE, though?
ACE points.
Yeah, I think 2019 would be ahead of ACE right now because it had Dorian. By this point, we're at September 12th, so all of Dorian already existed.
Damn.
At this point, really. That was a huge ACE maker. It was a major hurricane for almost 5 days, I think.
Yeah.
It might have been a bit over that, actually. I forget the exact
6
timeline.
days, I think.
Yeah, so that's enough to push your ACE up to well above 50 on a season. I think at that point, it was closer to 5 or 6 storms then. I know Dorian was the 4th named storm, of course. And even though we got 20 right now, I don't think we've crossed 40 ACE yet. So some time to go, really, before we catch up to 2019's total in ACE.
But if you also include, especially if you also count the other major hurricane that we've had last year, which was Hurricane Lorenzo up in the northeastern Atlantic.
Yeah, I mean, both of those definitely raked up the ACE. I mean, regardless, this year, though, has still seen a couple storms that have obviously brought significant impacts. Laura, of course, the most memorable one. Isaias, though, did bring a lot of damage, not just to the U.S., but the Caribbean as well.
I mean, you could get
a lot of rainfall.
I mean, Paulette expects to be a hurricane for at least 5 days, according to NHC as well. And it looks like we might get a few more of those classic hurricane tracks, generally staying out to sea, not moving particularly quickly, the ones that you always see articles about. When you look back through the archives, you don't seem to get many normal storms anymore.
It doesn't feel like it anymore.
It doesn't feel like it.
Even with Sally right now, it's very slow moving. The contributors put this in the chat to note. Fortunately, it's not a very populated area, and most of the highly dense population regions of southern Florida have been spared from too heavy rainfall. but there's been places that have been indicated to get well over a foot of rain since this morning along parts of the Florida Keys. So even right now, as a weaker tropical storm, it's still bringing generally adverse impacts to land right now. So I know we've been talking a lot about potential impacts in a few days from now with those heavier rainfall totals for more densely populated regions along the northern Gulf Coast, but it's still definitely a rain threat right now for land areas and places that people are too.
So once again, you can see it here, and looking further south as well, you can see the lower Keys there. Some significant showers moving through. And back on the infrared, you can see it once again. Can't quite get the detail now that it's shifted to the infrared, obviously, but still that convection blowing up quite considerably by the looks of things. Try and get that zoomed out picture once again. This is the whole picture of the Atlantic right now, and you can see there on the left hand side Sally, yep, really blowing up that convective top, and it's pretty much over the center, so maybe it's strengthening a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, there was some recon in it earlier that was trying to say it's been dropping from 1,005 to 1,004 millibars, but they didn't really go at least on some of the documented passes to the southeastern quadrant where they're saying the tropical storm force winds are. Although I'm pretty sure a lot of that was ship observed, so they didn't really need to the same way. But generally, a storm that's looking more impressive than it was this morning.
More questions about whether the Atlantic could get one Category 5 this year. Certainly could, probably will at some point. Although by the end of September or middle of October, if I haven't seen one, then might retract that statement. And an interesting point there about how people should be focusing more on impacts because everyone's getting caught up in wind speeds, and the possibility that Sally could stall and flood New Orleans. There's definitely the possibility of that. I don't know if you want to add on to that briefly.
I mean, I'm sure everyone can agree with this as well, but don't put, there's obviously the Saffir-Simpson wind scale is wind tilted, but, everyone really tracking these things or watching this for information about their area as well really shouldn't be paying over attention to the exact wind speed. So, questions about, will, Sally or Paulette become a major hurricane aren't really particularly, too relevant. It's other than the exact landfall area if unexpected deviations occur in Sally's regard. What you should really be focusing on is, the more widespread impacts that can occur to a lot of people with this storm. Of course, the hurricane force winds and damaging winds will be extending significantly away from the center, but you got storm surges 6 to 9 feet in low-lying areas. That's a major risk. And then you also have the potential for up to 10 to 15 inches of rainfall isolated, like Wyatt said earlier, up to 18 plus in some areas too. We've already seen this storm drop well over a foot of rain in fortunately less populated areas in the Everglades and the Keys. So, I get that, the wind speed's a lot of sensationalization and media talk and stuff, but there's a lot of other threats that are much more deadly. You got to keep in mind that 90% of the deaths from hurricanes and tropical cyclones are from flooding, not from wind. So, that really puts things in perspective.
Well, we're pretty much out of time for tonight. Just to point out that our 24/7 automated feed continues on the Force 13 channel. You can find that there somewhere. Strat, where's the best place to go for that?
I'll get the link for that right now because in about 10 minutes or so, this main live link will default to that anyways. But I'll post it in the chat right now too, for anyone that just wants some music and latest information in satellite imagery.
Strat rates it very highly. You can also find our social platforms, search Force 13 all in text, and we'll have regular updates whilst we're not commentating on the situation. Of course, we'll be back here again probably tomorrow, probably at a similar time. We'll work on getting that confirmed as soon as we can, and we'll put it out on our outlets. And you can communicate with our community and get involved with the discussion on our Discord server, discord.gg/Force13. That's pretty much it from us tonight. Obviously, we've got to watch these systems closely, but final thoughts from the team. Paulette, hurricane or not right now?
Paulette, I would say, would be a hurricane. Will be a hurricane by the next full advisory at 11 p.m. Eastern tonight.
Yes, if not a hurricane now, it will be a hurricane within the next few hours.
Yeah.
It also depends on what the data they can collect with recon and other analysis.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised. But there we have it. We'll see you again soon, and we'll probably have some video updates out there as well. Thanks for watching, and have a good night.
Stay safe, everyone.
Stay safe.